Good afternoon. Good morning. Good evening. Good election day extended. Depending on where you are on this planet, life is pretty strange right now. Of course, we're wrapped in a pandemic, as we have been since January. The United States is wrapped in political uncertainty as this election plays out in ways that were long predicted, but still feel calamitous and confusing and stress-inducing for many people. I'm Andy Revkin. I'm at the Earth Institute of Columbia University, where I'm building an initiative on communication and sustainability, which has never been felt more needed than right now. How do you make information matter in a world in which most of the means we communicate with are designed to distract, confuse, as opposed to connect and clarify. And this is a year-old effort. Today, I've doing kind of an open call here to friends and new contacts and colleagues to just explore what's going on, which is, again, full of certainty and uncertainty and division, my God. And to chill out a little bit. There's at least a couple of people coming on from the arts. There's many who are coming on who have expertise that can be valuable in situations like this, including in behavioral science. And I'm going to start with my friend Reggie Harris's song from a show that we did several months ago that I still find to be a bit of a salve. How do you pronounce that word? Salve these days. And it's so let me just show you this, and it's going to take a second for me to hook it up using StreamYard's backend. But I think you'll understand why I'm going to start with Reggie Harris here. I think I got this right for a change. So what you're seeing is a view of a show from, again, back in, I think it was April, May 31st. It was Memorial Day weekend. We were having a conversation there. It was the poet Andrei Codrescu, Genevieve Gunther, who's writing a book about climate and language, myself, and Reggie Harris, who's a songwriter and storyteller who just had on the show on Monday, where he was talking about this experience he had coming from a slaveholder on one end of his lineage, and a slave, of course, and learning to commune with the white side of his family. So here goes. This was his song at that time.
Yeah, we are. That's for sure. Everything's fluid.
Well, this jumped out at me 2 weeks ago. We will not rest till the storm is over. We will not lay this burden down. We will keep each other strong. We will love and carry on till we stand all together on solid ground. We will not rest till the storm is over. Hey, we will not lay this burden down. We will keep each other strong. We will love and carry on till we stand all together on solid ground. It's been a long, hard journey on a winding road. So many have gone before us. They carried a heavy load, but they went there singing as they made their way. And it's in their footsteps we follow as we work today. We will not rest till the storm is over. Hey, we will not lay this burden down. We will keep each other strong. We will love and carry on till we stand all together on solid ground. I know that you're weary. We all feel the pain. The actions of the world will try your soul again, but I know there's a better day, and it's coming our way. That's why we're raising our voices as we work today. We will not rest, till the storm is over. Yeah, we will not lay this burden down. We will keep each other strong. We will love and carry on. We stand all together solid ground. All around us there's hatred. All around us there's fear. Violence touches our lives, and the message is clear. We mourn our martyrs. In our hearts they'll stay. Then we'll sing, we shall overcome, and go on our way. We will not rest till the storm is over. Yeah, we will not lay this burden down. Yeah, we will keep each other strong. We'll love and carry on till we stand all together on solid ground. Till we stand all together on solid ground.
No, yay. Oh my gosh.
So beautiful.
So
I'm
as you
so
can see,
thankful to be able to do this.
that show, I think, articulated some important points about communication that relate to the means with which we accumulate the contexts, and the fact that a digital experience can actually be a powerful one, can actually be emotional and captivating and connecting. And I've got a couple of people here today who are the first ones to show up in my open house. It's great to have you here. Two Davids, David Ropeek, who is a longtime analyst of risk and fear and how we make decisions and fail to make decisions related to risk reduction. His book, How Risky Is It Really?, is an essential read. David came from a background in journalism and TV journalism particularly. And it's good to see you again. It's been a long time. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm unsettled today and these days, as everybody is, but hopeful too. You?
Yeah, I guess that seems to be. I have this diurnal cycle, which was violated today. Normally, I wake up pretty optimistic, go to bed pessimistic, wake up again optimistic. I guess that's true. Last night through the early hours of the morning, obviously I was getting really stressed out like so many people. And I woke up this morning and the data were coming in as has been predicted. And then Trump, of course, is trying to throw the wrench in the works by getting at people's emotions in certain ways and trying to derail politics as we knew it. But I still feel hopeful. I still feel there's some basic prospect for America to figure out paths forward.
Some people ask me from time to time, for those who aren't familiar, I teach and write about the psychology of why we worry about things the way we do, and we over worry about some things and under worry about others. And I'm just a student of that stuff, not an original researcher, journalist. And people ask me, so how can we worry better? And so I took some of my advice this morning. I said, stop worrying altogether and go to some place that's away from all of that. So instead of doom scrolling or hope scrolling, as it's called now online these days, as the mail-in ballots come in, I went out in the backyard and played with the dog.
Right.
And there was nothing else. And the dog is Zen. I mean, the dog is so beautifully, wonderfully, purely only in the moment and happy in a relationship with me. And it's inspirational to remember that there's a longer, bigger picture than the crummy details that we're dealing with down on the today level.
Yeah. And you're in the Boston area.
Concord, Mass.
Yeah. David Eisenberg, who's here as well. You can see his icon. We had some connectivity questions, but great to see you, David.
Hello.
And you're in Woods Hole, right? Right, literally in Woods Hole, Massachusetts.
I'm right in the middle of Woods Hole, Massachusetts.
And I've been very jealous of you because you were posting pictures off and on of striped bass that you've caught in the waters off there. And I haven't been out on the ocean, even though I grew up in Rhode Island, for too long. And I miss fishing. So hope you've been fishing.
Yes. The last trip was on something like October 20th. And me and my buddy each caught a keeper. And I knew it was the end of the season. And we called it a good year.
So I've had trouble describing you to people because you're a technologist. You're a longtime focus on networks, making them functional in a world now that's so hyper connected, at least for those of us who have access to the internet. And yet, as I said at the introduction, seems hyper confused sometimes. Could you give a thumbnail sketch of your background and what brings you to that arena?
Well, gosh, I wasn't prepared to do this, but basically, I got it.
Like,
Yeah.
we're at a bar.
So
we're sitting at a bar having a whiskey.
Yeah. I grew up in Woods Hole, and in Woods Hole, pretty much everyone becomes a biologist or an oceanographer. And so before I knew it, I was getting my PhD at Caltech in biology. I was interested in brain and actually in human consciousness, but I wound up doing my work on how the sounds of speech are represented in the brain. And of course, the logical place for me to have a career was Bell Labs. And
Right.
so I went to Bell Labs, where my speech expertise was valued, but I wound up getting interested in networks and how networks create value. And this was the late 80s and the early 90s when the internet was just starting to appear and become hugely popular. And senior management at AT&T didn't really understand the internet. And
that's a very weird statement, by the way, because AT&T was a company that dealt with networks and everything, right?
Oh, yeah, indeed. But several people have documented the fact that AT&T was offered the early R&D contract on the internet, the ARPANET, NSFNet, etc., and they turned it down. It wasn't relevant to their telephone network, and so anyway, and they really didn't understand what it was. They didn't understand the fact that people could log on and write applications and create value at the edge and get their friends involved.
Terry, hold on one second.
Anyway, and so I wrote this. Let me wrap it up. I wrote this essay about how the intelligent network was a good idea once, but isn't anymore. And I pretty much got not exactly fired, but ostracized to where it was 1997, and the internet. There was a lot of opportunity outside of AT&T, so I quit. And since then, I've been making my way as an independent. And that we can end the story there or whatever. I'm not hearing you. I think you're on mute.
Oh, right. I did mute myself. I have Terry Tempest Williams on the phone, a wonderful poet and essayist. And I want to see if I can get her on even this way in a second. But hold on, Terry. Are you going to join by phone, or can you not participate today? I'm doing okay. We have started the show, so I'm actually broadcasting live right now. But I could put this on speaker if you want to contribute some thoughts. If you can come on when you can in the next half hour, that'd be wonderful. I sent you some links, or you can call and we can do it by phone too. That's fine. All right, hold on for 1 second. Let me just
put her on speakerphone.
Yeah, I'm putting you on speaker.
Okay.
This is Terry Tempest Williams. Are you in Utah, I assume, or thereabouts?
We are in Utah, and we've just been with family, so it's been intense. Some of them who voted for Trump and believe he's going to win. So I'm just calling to check in with you, to say I love you, and thank you for holding us all together.
Well, we all hold each other all together, I think, in this world. One reason I do these programs is selfish. It's a way for me to connect a bit of a web that I feel helps sustain my confidence that the world can move through tough times through conversation, often more than what I spent 30 years doing, which is storytelling, kind of exposition as opposed to conversation.
And I think that's what is called for right now, is just having these hard conversations with people close to us. I just had a conversation with my brother and said, what am I missing? Talk to me. What am I not understanding in terms of the Trump supporters? Because even if Biden wins, especially if Biden wins, we've got so much work to do to figure out how it is that we are this divided, and no moral repudiation of racism and misogyny and violence against the earth. And that's what I'm struggling with.
Can you summarize in any way how that conversation has gone so far, in asking those kinds of questions? My
brother just said, you do not see me, being hurt. And that's a tough one for me, because my brother and I talk all the time. He's a beautiful person. He's a working man right now as we speak. At 6:30, he was in the trenches with a shovel in hand, and all of the men he worked with have voted for Trump. And they're largely white men, but not all of them. And so I think there's some, I guess what I feel, Andy, is I just have to do my work. And my work right now is figuring out the state I live in and the family that is mine. And they're good people. But how can they turn away from this kind of violence and inhumanity, And last night, did you watch when Trump came out in the White House? And it was chilling to me. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like that's even being discussed in terms of what he set in motion, whether or not it has any legs with the law. I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
I had just nodded out just before I saw the tweet that went before it. And I said, here he is. Before, this was the tweet that was kind of setting up the speech. And he said, the way I described it was, he's been piling kindling up around the country for months, and he just poured gasoline on it. And then, of course, the trigger, he's trying to trigger this. Although what's encouraging is even arch conservative commentators like Ben Shapiro was immediately saying this is not the way we do things. So I think it's still an open question how that plays out. What I really treasure in what you just described, though, in your conversation with your brother, it relates to some conversations in my wife's family. She's from rural Maine, lobstermen who were Republicans, who were Trumpian voters. One of whom, her cousin, a woman who had shifted to not supporting Trump anymore. And even in my family, I have two sons, one of whom was a Bernie guy who switched to being a Biden guy. And the other son is complicated. He may have very well voted for Trump in California. So I've got it within my own family, kind of a sense of a challenge of how do we all talk to each other going forward. And what I think is encouraging is, we here we are on the internet talking globally. I connect with people in Zambia and elsewhere through this portal, but the conversations that seem to matter most are the ones where you begin at home and work your way out.
That's the important point you make is, this division is not outside of us; it is inside us, and that's what I'm trying to hold. And to have, these difficult conversations in the midst of a pandemic, it really feels epic to me. And I certainly don't have any answers. I just want to take care of the people I love. And I think the encouraging thing is that, when everyone says stay calm, I'm not so interested in staying calm. I'm interested in staying engaged. And that's a really important distinction for me personally.
Yeah, I think that says a lot. Although there is a calming aspect, like Reggie Harris, who was on the show on Monday, I was describing earlier, he's a Black songwriter and storyteller I've known for 20 plus years in the Hudson Valley. who in 1992 learned of his slave ancestry, and the fact that he has a great grandfather who was Wickham, Williams Carter Wickham, whose statue was toppled in June in Richmond, Virginia, and he spent the last decade connecting with the white side of his family. And there were several points in the conversation we had on Monday, which is about how to hold a difficult conversation, and where he described these long pauses. He said there was a point where he and his white cousin, met up 10 years ago at Hickory Hill, the plantation, where this enslaver and the enslaved had lived and died, and he said it took him 10 minutes. He had to sit in the car for about 10 minutes before he decided to walk with her. And then he ended up writing a song later that was a beautiful song about where they're going from there. And there was another point where another cousin who was on the show on Monday, Wallace Raymer, a woman who, she said there was a point where she met with Reggie and she had worked up a plan she apologized basically for the entire history of her family. And,
wow.
But here's the cool, then he said, it'll take me some time to respond to that. She said, I'm sorry. He didn't kind of say it's okay, or you know what I mean? He didn't immediately jump in and say it's okay. He said, I got to live with that for a while. And so this idea of time and calm, and he also described recently, and I'm going to get David Ropik on here in a minute again too, who's talks about how to handle risk and stuff. He's on screen. He said that it's there. Part of that is working with yourself, working with your inner. There's like a rigor to it.
I think that's so well said, and I love this story that you're sharing. In that, I think the days of looking for leadership beyond ourselves are over. It is never going to be one person, or one leader that's going to save us. I think we each have to lead in the ways that we understand our own power and begin there. And I agree with you. Maybe that's where the stillness of soul is. We return to our roots. We return to our homes. We return to our families and do the deep work of engagement.
It feels right to me. So you can't see the screen, of course, if you're in a car or whatever. But David Ropik, who lives in the Boston area and has written a book called "How Risky Is It Really?" He really has focused his career on how we differ on our approaches to risk and how you communicate effectively around risks of all kinds. And David Eisenberg is on here too, who I was just explaining. He's one of the early forces trying to understand networks, the internet side, the digital connections. And he's going to be weighing in a little bit too. And this is all informal conversation. And I just noticed, and Andrei Kodrescu has just joined us here as well from the poet. And so that's the landscape there. David Ropik, I don't know if you had some thought on that. Like, how much of this is internal? Like how you work on your own reaction to risk or your own reaction to conflict or debate?
I think my own dealing with all of this is exemplary of what I've learned about it all. So I started my career as a journalist, inspired by my father to be a journalist, interested in environmental issues, picked up the mantle of environmental reporter. I remember Ms. Tempest Williams and the SEJ conferences. And so got into why it seems like, compared to the evidence, our fears of some things exceed what the experts would say we need to worry about, and in some cases don't. But what I've learned is that that goes into my rational brain, and I'm no better at fearing the right things or the wrong things than the next person, even though I know this whole literature. And that's, to me, the most important lesson of my experience, and I think it's relevant to all of us, and it's certainly relevant this morning. We pretend we're smarter than we are. As Ambrose Bierce said in the Devil's Dictionary, the brain is only the organ with which we think we think. We are still fundamentally biological creatures Most of our expression of conscious emotion, for example, follows post hoc, if you follow through the brain, what the body has already started doing. When we describe ourselves as afraid, the heart is already racing and the body chemistry has already changed. And the brain is recognizing that and then expresses in consciousness fear. Fear is a post hoc, and so are other emotions, post hoc expression of what our body's already done. So I'm pretty reductionist about how we behave. I highly commend a book by Robert Sapolsky called Behave, Humans at Their Best and Worst. It's quite a tome, not an easy read, although Sapolsky's an entertaining writer, but it's about the biology that drives us. And here's why I'm spending so much time on this. We're having this conversation out of our kind of rational brains. Yesterday's vote was not a rational brain vote. And forgive me, Ms. Tempest Williams, but we do still heavily look to our single leaders and not just ourselves. And that's what yesterday's vote was. There were, according to Reuters, 139 counties that went for Trump in 2016 that have high COVID death rates and went for him more this year. Now, what that tells me is, with all that preface that I just laid down, that what they fear more, your brother perhaps, is disloyalty to their tribe. So biologically, we have evolved to be very exquisitely sensitive to whether people are on our side or not. Because when the lion attacks, if they're on our side, we got a shot. And if the lion attacks and the tribe says, no, you disagreed with us, you voted for the wrong chief or whatever, you're lion food. So we are exquisitely biologically attuned, lots of neuroscience on this, to signals of trust. And that yesterday mattered more. That fear of being rejected from the tribe for not going along with the tribe's view that, COVID's a hoax or COVID's not a big deal because Trump screwed up our response. So if COVID was a big deal, that would be bad for our tribe. So that's the tribal view. And it mattered more to voters, even in places where people are dying all around them of an actual disease. What mattered more was their fear of social rejection from their tribe. That says an awful lot to me about how powerfully we are still biological creatures, not the fancy thinkers that we like to think we are.
Boy, that resonates a lot. And of course, that relates to some of my learning that came very late on climate change. Was there's a subset of this body of science is cultural cognition.
I'll turn my phone off.
Yeah, that's okay. Cultural cognition is just this idea that it's evolutionary, that it's logical, that we adapt. There's adaptive value to being tied to your tribe more than to facts.
It's really, we have two genetic imperatives: survival and procreation, keeping our genes going. We call those our kids, right? That drives a lot of what we then express rationally. And this perception of COVID is not a big deal is screaming at us as an example. Just one example of how your brother, Ms. Tempest Williams, said, "You don't see me."
My brother had COVID.
Say that again?
You've seen me enough. My brother had COVID.
He had COVID. The brother who was saying,
wow.
So powerful.
And so I think what he's saying is, you don't see me in my terms. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I find what you're saying, very at once, but I still, rather than using the word tribe, I just keep thinking about community. And I don't think this is soft-headed, but I think we have to, keep our own sense of community open and look to each other. I just think that we're all so isolated, especially now with the pandemic. We're on the screens. We're not having those face-to-face conversations, and I think those are crucial. And I do believe that we are eroding as a country and evolving as a country. And evolution depends on ultimately being evicted from the tribe. And so I think it's all these layers at once that we're contending with.
Yeah. Terry, if you can hang on a second, I wanted to bring in David Eisenberg, who has again, he's focused on the network, the digital stuff, which again can be this awful thing, and sometimes can connect folks. Like Lisa, my wife, and family in rural Maine. In many ways, they connect more and can have some of those conversations more because they're sort of scattered in space.
Right.
Using that, although again, you have that brittle two-dimensional aspect, or one-dimensional if it's just voice. It's still an open question. But David Eisenberg, this idea of a stupid network, can we have a stupid and a sort of wise network at the same time?
Well, the wisdom, like the rest of the network, is at the edges where the users of the network are. The network itself just does a job. It's like a road. You don't talk about a road as intelligent, and you shouldn't talk about it. I mean,
Right.
because networks evolved as a private business, there was a telephone network, there was a television network, there's an electrical network grid, and all of those are special purpose networks designed to support individual businesses or individual business propositions. The internet is the first network that is a general purpose network that it is not designed to support a specific thing. It's designed to support any content you can digitize and stuff in a packet and send to your friends. And that's it's been incredible how it's evolved to this very application, StreamYard. Oh my God, it's amazing. 10 years ago we wouldn't have thought about it, but so it's really a different kind of network, and as such, it's been used. I used to think that the internet would be like the antidote to nationalism, racism, and division. And I used to think that it would be the ultimate participatory democracy. John Perry Barlow, who wrote the Declaration of Independence for cyberspace, and I became close friends. And I believed what he wrote with all my heart and soul, and I fought to make the internet be this ultimate good. Turns out that it is now used so that big governments can track down dissidents, and big companies can learn what you like and what your medical problems are and who your friends are and what your political opinions are and what color is your skin and what your sexual preferences are, et cetera, et cetera. And so they can sell you stuff, and so they can, and governments can surveil you with the same information and manipulate you with the same information. And so the internet has become kind of a dangerous place, but it's still really miraculous when people like us can get together. And I mean, just somebody said it on Twitter this morning, imagine COVID without the internet. Right now, it's the basis of my social life. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. I think that some of what's happened is absolutely tragic, the way it can help right-wing nutcases find each other and create conspiracies and violent fantasies that they can then act on. That's just absolutely tragic, but at the same time, it's also a wellspring of good. So I don't know what I think anymore.
Andy, can I butt in?
Yeah.
Please,
We'll get Andre
David,
that was great.
Friends, you talk about the right-wing nutcases finding each other. Who do you choose to be friends with? We all can choose who we choose to be friends with now in this networked world. We can choose what sources of information feel good to us. Now, the question, and this is obvious, that was a rhetorical question. The question is, why do we do that? Why do we choose only certain sources of information? Why do we choose to believe certain sources of information and discount others? Why do we choose the friends we choose and unlike the friends that we don't? What's going on behaviorally that the network facilitates, I think, reflects back to these basic biological who we are drives. It's a tool, you're right. It's a road, but it's a tool for what? And that's where the both tremendous benefits, but also risks of this selective networking world come into play. Me.
Here.
And there's yet another David Weinberger, who David Eisenberg, I think he's part of your network, who wrote that book years ago that I have on the shelf here, and describes the prospect of building a smart room. And I think smart is not quite the right word, because as we've said here, a lot of this is about emotions and human connectivity, not just facts. But and I still think that's the question. That's the David Eisenberg question. Bill Bryson, his book about the short history of everything. Bill Bryson, I love this line. He described us as both divine and felonious. Humans, we make the absolute worst of everything around us and the absolute best of everything around us, depending on individual or community decisions. I should get Bill on here someday to talk about that. And that circles back to Terry. Terry's essays and writing, I think, can take us to, can build the space, those opportunities, those moments when there's mostly silence, where you can start to find those other paths. A lot of what we've been talking about right now still feels about, to me, like, is there something to work on related to our own internal capacities? And this would be something to teach to. It's the way a family would raise itself. It's, if you want to have a household that doesn't end up throwing plates, it's sort of the same question here about having circuit breakers or norms or patterns or behaviors we can work on that take us to that better side of us. And I still think I don't know the answer to that, because I struggle with that every day as a communicator. Terry, I don't know if you're in a position. Are you in a car now, or are you?
Yeah, we're just passing Mount Timpanogos, and we've passed Utah Lake, the next lake over from Great Salt Lake. And so we're heading down to southern Utah, the Red Rock Desert. Andy, I was just thinking, and I so appreciate David and Andre and your guests. My world is pretty small. We live in a community of about 300 people, but it's very diverse philosophically. Everyone wants to just leave each other alone, and we're in the outback. But, one thing we're doing before the pandemic prohibited it was have difficult dinner parties. We have a table that seats 8, and we made sure that no one really agreed on anything. But
Oh gosh.
something about sitting down and breaking bread together where people were well-mannered. There was a form, and we could ask each other questions. And I just, there's so little I can do, but what I can do, I really want to bring this human element back, whether it's, difficult dinner parties, or, having the conversations with family members, or asking my own self, if I'm asking everyone else to change their minds, how am I changing mine? Because I don't think it's all one way. I think it has to be this this eddy right now of currents that feed each other rather than, flow past each other.
Yeah, that difficult dinner party concept, I love that idea. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at on here at the initiative I'm running on Mondays, the sessions I do on Monday typically.
And I really believe that the first, that the human heart is the first home of democracy. Can we be equitable? Can we listen? And not just with our mind and opinions, but with our whole self. I think that is what is being asked of us alongside these considerations. how to bring the mind and the body together. And ultimately, I think we're looking at spiritual issues, not just political or biological ones.
Yes, I think that this is a really valuable conversation we're having right now.
Yeah.
I would love to see out the window that landscape. The other thing that you said on this show really early on was very bad connectivity, but it's sort of a grainy picture from your back patio, looking at the monuments there, the great rock outcroppings and mesas, and you were saying the breakage of things, erosion is a form of creation, that something new is being formed even as things are being broken.
And it brings us to our essence, and I think that we remember that we're alive, and I can hardly wait to get back to our valley, because in the midst of all this uncertainty and chaos, I know Castleton Tower will still be there. And you know what geologists have found out is that putting a seismometer at the base of Castleton Tower, this 400-foot freestanding Wingate tower of sandstone, and then putting a seismometer on the top of that tower, is that the tower has a pulse. It has a heartbeat. And even stone, has a resonance. And I think just that, Native people, what Indigenous people have always known, science is now. So I think that even though it looks like we are in these opposite poles, I think that something is happening. And there is a resonance, if we can dare to not look away, that will carry us forward. That
feels very restorative to me to even ponder that concept. And I feel the same way. If we can hang on, to me, a lot of this gets to these, maybe one of the most important practices feels like avoiding those pinch points that you can at least, as David said, even when we think we don't really, biologically, we're always playing catch up with our actual reactions. But at the same time, with practice, I think you can start to sense when you're getting to a point of brittleness, of breakage. Again, whether it's in a personal relationship, in a family, in a community. I'll mention that word circuit breakers again. And we've developed those over time through history. Countries that are on the verge of war, like India and Pakistan, mostly don't end up pulling the trigger, thankfully. But it takes work. It takes understanding and constant communication. The Cold War, is a good example of that, in the way that we haven't, beyond the awful immolation in Japan, we haven't repeated that disaster yet.
Richard Nixon said, they don't teach you this in Sunday school, but what really drives people is fear. Pakistan and India haven't shot at each other for the dust that they know they'd end up as if they did. As with the Cold War, I regret to say, as inspirational as it is that we should all be one, in the name of self-protection, there are times when we become one. On 2001, the terrorist attacks, everybody was not a Democrat or Republican. We were Americans because we're all threatened together. I think that the sense of threat actually can be a positive. It can be a bringer together. And it's heartbreaking to see that the greater threat in this case was tribal loyalty, as I said, not COVID. This could have been a bringer together, but it wasn't taken that way by the leader of one of their tribes, one of the groups.
And that gets back to that leadership matters for all of that local connectivity and communion. Especially in the social media age. Although just earlier today, I was discussing how the Rwanda genocide was triggered by radio, at least the extent of it. So this isn't just an internet thing either, that we tend to use these tools for better or worse. And this brings up something. I'm hoping a couple of people might come in later in the show, and you can all weigh in on this. And Andre, I want to bring you in now too, Andre Kudrescu. there are many among my friends, especially on climate issues like that and race, who said we just need to defeat the bastards. This gets to David Ropeek's point. You know, sometimes it's just literally it is a us and them thing, that we can't all commune, that we're never going to bridge some of these gaps, and some of this is a big chunk of this is just about power. Now, Andre, you came from a background in Eastern Europe where power dominated over politics, and here we are.
Yes.
So what's on your mind when you think reacting to what you've been hearing?
Well, I think today the value of poetry has increased greatly. We can invest in poetry because there isn't the reason and the irrational are the body and the heart are very complex categories, and in the irrational there exist all sorts of structures and hierarchies. And if you have an irrational, I mean, if you go with your feelings about mirroring everything that you feel, and this has been an object of mirroring, because a lot of the media that we listen and look to is a mirror of it's an echo chamber, and that's why we choose it. And poetry deals with the mysteries of the gaps between mind and the unconscious. And I think that the practice of it is going to become more and more valuable in language, because the languages we speak are various. And the reason why, for instance, Trump has appealed to people is because he doesn't speak like a politician. Whether he lies or not, he sounds like he's one of the guys. And he's not articulate. Most people are inarticulate. Now, poetry manages to not finish a sentence and be inarticulate, in that it leaves a mystery to the listener or the reader, and that nothing is finished, nothing is complete. And so you make these forays in poetry of researching language, or the most effective language to getting at the mystery. The Romanian poet Lucian Blaga said, "Our job in Faced with the Mystery is not to explain it, but to make it more mysterious." And I think, in a way, everything you know, then the idea is not to explain it quickly, but to make it more mysterious. And I think the future belongs to a form of expression that is not a machine, and it's not feeling either, but it is a hybrid. It's a combination. We are already post-human in the sense that we walk around with a lot of wires on us, and we communicate through screens, and it's not very long before we're chipped. And so we are human, but we have these extensions as well. So between the mind and the heart, there is a constant struggle. And poetry speaks that language. So, when I grew up, everybody lied. Society was a lie. Everything you heard out loud in the newspapers and as such. There wasn't much media, television, but everything was a lie, and everybody knew it was a lie. And so if you wanted to tell something to somebody, you went to the park and you spoke in whispers. And now we can't speak in whispers anymore, because every whisper is heard. If this was really a totalitarian society, or that like the one I grew up in, everybody would be heard, and it doesn't. So we might as well just bring it out, but watch for the mirror, because I think the mirror of the media is dangerous to poetry, and poetry is more effective.
You said something there about poetry essentially complicating, making things more mysterious. Again, on Monday on the show here, which was about how to hold a difficult conversation. Peter Coleman, who runs the Difficult Conversations Laboratory at Columbia, who's become a friend because we're like-minded. He talks often about when you're facing intractable conflict, and his roots come from studying conflict, like Middle East conflict. And what you want is to complicate the narrative. You want to expose complexity. You don't want to. This is not about resolving a dispute. It's about finding space for cooperation amid difference. It feels very similar to what you were just saying about poetry.
Yeah, I have a brief poem, and then I'll end because I have to go. But I think this addresses that question. It's called The Return of the Repressed in the Age of the Avant-Garde Robots. Creating and smashing ideas of high and low was a good business, but it cost followers much unneeded pain. They did get tenure, but at what cost? To take up gymnastics at their age was therapeutic, but not glorious. Still, that is the law of succession. First, the French have a good party, then the Germans clean up, then the weather messes up the plumbing, and the proletariat rises again with tools. They were waiting patiently in the unconscious for transfer. Yeah, I could read it again like some of my friends do. They read their poems twice.
Yeah, I gotta see that written down so I could chew on it for a while.
Yeah, I've often had that.
It's in a book called No Time Like Now, which it really is, and it's the cover is an artwork I did, which is a doll with the barbed wire around her head and keyboard that is some letters are blacked out.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you could pop in today, Andre. And
well, thanks.
Folks can find you easily.
Thank you, Andre. That is so beautiful. And I'm going to have to check out too. We're about to go up a mountain pass, and I'm going to lose connectivity. But I just want to say one thing, and thank you, Andy. I love you, and to your guests. I was thinking about Virginia Woolf. She says thinking is a form of fighting, and I love that. And that idea of divine specificity, and I felt that with you today, and I appreciate you.
Well, I deeply appreciate you and your writing and your humanity, and let's get you back on here when time allows. And
Terry, I'm the risk guy. You're not driving, are you?
No, thank heavens, I'm not.
Thank you. All right. I should have asked that at the beginning.
All right, David is the risk communication guy. He would be.
Thank you, David. Yeah. I really appreciate that. I am not driving. I'm actually looking at birds and listening.
Good.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thank you all.
Right. Take care, everyone.
Take care, Terry. Great that you can come in.
Love you.
Take care.
And Andre, it's wonderful to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good listening to everyone.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that was a good first round here. So, David Eisenberg, getting back to you and how you wrangle your own network, and I've been part of your frequent sessions, most of which you do as sort of a weekly check-in. I kind of like that. There's not a particular subject or theme. Is there? And I know there's been differences of opinion in there too, right? So what's that feel like? What do you learn, or what do you gain from having just a weekly check-in, or by, I know it's maybe more frequent than weekly, but how does that work? And within the tech sphere, there are definitely all kinds of attitudes and opinions about everything.
Well, the people that I meet with every week are people that I've known variously for years or decades in face-to-face interactions. I curate a small community of people who I think are smart people, much like you do, Andy, on this show. Since 2000, we've been having an annual 3-day meeting in a secret place, a wonderful place with good food and good music and ocean breezes and so on, good architecture. And, the idea is to get people to think their best thoughts. And so what I do on this weekly Zoom call is just try to keep the community together. Those in the community that want to stay together have a place to come and gather and share. And we talk about internet. We talk, lately we've been talking election and politics, and it is sort of a tribe, and very much like-minded people who share a lot of epistemology. So if you're asking, that's what I do in my weekly check-in. We also, by the way, have occasional deep dives where we invite someone to expound on a particular subject, and then we discuss what our discussion revolves around that subject.
And what brought you to include music? And I went to one of your sessions a decade ago. I think it was right around the time just before the Great Recession kicked in, and I was struck by how you had these pretty intense technical discussions, and then every couple hours you had some pretty great musicians come in and just play. Where did that come from?
Well, I'm a brain scientist, I guess, and I believe in using the whole brain, and that different inputs facilitate different kinds of thinking. And and I love music, so it's kind of an excuse to get my musical heroes to come and play live music for me and my friends. All of those things, but music has always been part of my consciousness, and I think of it as another form of intellectual activity and a form of self-discovery, I guess.
So with that in mind, I'm going to intersperse right now a performance that was done recently on one of my Sunday shows by Dean Friedman, who's best known to those of us who grew up in the 20th century as the songwriter behind Ariel and McDonald's Girl, which were big hits in the 70s. And he's gone on to a very variegated career making music professionally. And he came on the show recently and sang a tune that he had just written called Halfway Normal World. So let's see if this works. Hold on.
This is a kind of a hopeful song. I just wanna go to the movies, meet up with a bunch of my friends, buy a box of Skittles, find some good seats in the middle, and watch till the credits roll to the end. And maybe stop at the diner, burger with some fries and a Coke, some pie for dessert, couldn't hurt, the service so slow it's a joke. Drop some change in the jukebox, the Beach Boys, California girls. I wish I could get back to a halfway normal world. Take me out to the ball game, doesn't seem like too much to ask. A diamond oasis, players are running the bases, the catcher is wearing a mask. We'll all root for the home team, we'll fill up on peanuts and beer. We'll yell at the umpire and tell him to retire, and think of folks that couldn't be here. On the mound, the pitcher, a southpaw, his curveball will be hurled. I wish I could get back to a halfway normal world. I wish we could get back to a halfway normal world. I'm gonna throw a big party, invite everybody I know. We'll kibitz and mingle. I'll serve pretzels and Pringles. We'll sit side by side and toe to toe. We'll lose ourselves in deep conversation. We'll play lots of silly games. We'll laugh and we'll smile, and then after a while, we'll barely remember our names. And we'll all wind up in the kitchen at the counter with the tablecloth unfurled. I wish I could get back to a halfway normal world. I wish we could get back to a halfway normal world.
So a show within a show. That was from a month or so ago. Dean really nailed that one. To my mind, he just was on the show again. He has an album he's recording slowly but surely in his spare time.
Lovely.
And yeah, that's what I think. Really fantastic. There's a couple other guests coming on now. Irene O'Garden, my good friend, poet, writer, educator, naturalist. And Megan Parker, who's the executive director of the Society of
yay!
Environmental Journalists, right?
Hi, Megan.
Irene was recently on the 30th anniversary meeting of the Society of Environmental Journalists. Did not take place in a city. It took place online, of course. And the finale was convening, including some musicians and poets, and Irene was one of them. And actually, Terry Tempest Williams, who was just on here a few minutes ago, was another.
And let me butt in and say that I was one of the founding members the first year that SEJ met in Boulder, Colorado, after 9 prominent journalists got it going. For 10 years, I was on the board. So a reunion of a kind.
Yeah.
Wow, it's great to meet you, David.
So Megan and Irene, we've been talking about all manner of things. Terry Tempest Williams called in from the car where she was a passenger in the car who had just driven from. She had just had a very difficult conversation with a brother who is a Trump voter, and who said to her the most profound, simple statement. He said, "You don't see me. You don't see me." And as we were talking about how do we find paths to connect. At another point here, this first hour, we were talking about, are there limits to that? Are there points when you just have to be in a win-lose mode when someone has to be out of power, as opposed to thinking you can always find a pathway through conversation? And they're all open questions. David Eisenberg here was talking about the network, the digital side, which is allowing us all to convene here, but as we all know, and has been shown in some documentaries and other work recently, it's essentially designed to take us to the tougher part of ourselves, to distract us, to activate us in ways that aren't always productive, as we've seen. And of course, it's very hackable as well on top of that. So just, Megan, how are you doing? And where are you? I'm trying to remember where you live.
I'm up in New Hampshire right now, although normally I'm in DC in the thick of it. But for this particular year, it's extraordinary in so many ways. And it was a little odd not to be in DC for the election, but I don't know. It's I might be back before it's over.
I know, that's kind of a weird concept. Wow.
When are you scheduled?
Well, it's an open question. It's things keep. It's such a dynamic. I think of it as like the world's worst decision-making vortex, right? As much as we're looking at our leadership and the challenges they have making decisions. I mean, it trickles down for all of us. Whether it's your business or your organization or your own family. It's you have an array of not bad choices, basically. So everybody's trying to figure out what the least worst choice is on the least, on the information that you have, which is inadequate. So I think that is really what COVID has really forced upon us. But as Andy put forth in his kind of set of issues for today, we face similar decision-making challenges around climate, in a very similar way. Not a lot of great choices, and not a lot of, not all the information that we need. But yet we still have to make those decisions.
And actually, David, David Ropik, there's something else here I wanted to bring up with you, which even folks who are like-minded on the climate problem are you find these internal sets of wedges that form as everyone is competing for their own part of the solution. And journalists have had to navigate this terrain for a long time. I think you have climate campaigners who are all about nuclear. You have those who are all about 100% renewable by date X, whenever that date is. You have those who are. This is setting aside those who say it's not a problem, and it seems another one of our cultural community tribal questions is facing a big complex problem like climate change. You kind of want diversity of approaches, but we don't seem to be tolerant of that. Like we don't. This came up with Biden just in the context of,
fracking
in the primary being tugged to have to say fracking we have to end, and then in that coming back to bite him potentially in the final election.
So the people who so I reported on nuclear a lot. I'll just use that as one example of what you're talking about. So I reported on nuclear a lot back when I was a TV reporter in Boston in the 70s and 80s, Seabrook and Shoreham and a whole bunch, and know a lot of the people who are like pro and con. And so when they talk about what our energy solutions are and they talk about climate change, they're waving flags that represent those affiliations, those group affiliations. I am with the people who are pro or anti-Pickett, right? I still have conversations with my anti-nuclear friends where, they've changed from, no, the risk is high, to now it's financial, to now it's this, but it's all about, I'm going to be loyal to my anti-nuclear friends, or I'm going to be loyal to my pro-solar friends and so forth. And the bigger picture and the big rational discussion that you're implying is not what it's about. It's not what it's about. I had this conversation, Megan, I'm sure you guys are still having it in SEJ, where journalism and environmentalism aren't supposed to be mixed. Right? And they were a lot, right? We struggled with it on the board of SEJ, right? So people bring to their perspective on issue, you name it, who they are and what their deeper values, moralities, and I hate to use this word again, tribal or group affiliations are. And if I see myself as a classical old school, if I may, environmentalist, I want all chemicals removed from the environment. And I think nuclear are bad. And these are subscribed positions I'm supposed to have. And that way the conversation isn't about climate change really and solving things. It's about my niche. Right. That's how we behave. It's how we behaved yesterday at the polls. It's too bad, but it's kind of intrinsic to us.
Yeah, it does seem to be tough. And just going to get to Irene in a second, but Megan too. This would have been bad enough if journalism wasn't in the mode of imploding right now as a sustainable enterprise. So talk about layer cake of risks, and it's a cake that's kind of being baked at different pace, different levels, depending on where you are in the cake, and it's being eroded and eaten. And so is there a common sense that emerged this year at the meeting, or just generally about and journalism? I mean, having been in this arena, I know that we've often amplified problems. We're looking for the differences. We're not looking for in communities. I had a session the other day where Amanda Ripley was on from Solutions Journalism Network. And we were talking about the old journalism practices. And I said, I'm totally guilty of interviewing someone, looking for the quote, looking for that great crystalline quote that just captures the hard edge front page kicker quote, and not actually thinking about the problem or how that relates to the bigger issues. And I don't know what journalists, what's the temperature you've been able to take there lately?
Well, it's This year is, as you said, it was an ongoing process of change in the industry, and upheaval, and COVID was the threat multiplier, on top of that already very, very rocky roller coaster road. And to David's point about the debate, that debate is still ongoing within the organization, within the board, within journalism more broadly.
It's going to be, yeah.
Yeah, I think the Scientific American endorsement,
Right.
is just sort of one example of this question. And to Andy's point, yeah, that sort of the or that affiliation, right, does tend, that sense of which side are you on, tends to kind of guide some of these stories about it. I would one thing I did notice just today, and of course today is awfully soon to say much about the election, but there has been a lot of sort of looking at those gaps of those places where we didn't, to borrow Terry's words, where we didn't see people, right, where people weren't seen. And local news, of course, has been already identified as a huge problem, the loss of local newspapers or capacity at local newspapers. And so there's these literal deserts of news, right? And so those people aren't being seen in that media. And I think more pointedly too, the sort of assumption that these voting blocks, right, the discussion that's ongoing about the Latino vote and how those assumptions didn't effectively capture a great diversity of voting patterns within that group, and I think the same thing contributes to what Andy was saying about the need to have a fuller picture of the differences and diversity of views, not just from location, from geography or race or solutions or approach, right? We just got to get a lot more specific. There's of course a lot of reasons why that doesn't happen, right? Money, time being the two biggest ones, right? But it's also about what the norms are, right? If the norm is, well, it's okay to just go ask one guy, about something, and that build a whole narrative around it without saying, well, what would somebody else who's positioned differently in a different region or of a different race or of a different background or of a different experience say about this? Then, we're never going to get to that level of specificity. But it's also, these major externalities operating on the media industry. Those are, I don't want to discount the impact of just time and money on the gaps in the system. It really can't be understated.
So Irene, we also live now in a time when media are no longer the gatekeeper that has to be passed for an idea or a connection or an insight to get from a source to the public. There's direct outreach, there's poetry, there's performance, there's the education system, which you also work in. And you have done a great job with your book and your writing of offering ways to connect. When you think about this moment and all that's, the focus is so much on what divides us, what jumps to the foreground for you?
Well, other than the nausea that I've been feeling today, I have a little ginger tea going on. What struck me when Megan was talking was I have sort of all of the ballpark type ideas. So I'm not really a, political or climate scientist or any of that kind of thing. But boy, Megan saying, how do we reach these other voices? I thought, wouldn't it be great if there were something like StoryCorps, like a bookmobile or a storymobile where we would collect people's opinions and ideas and so forth, so that they would feel heard. I think the issue is really about listening. That it's really for people to listen right now, and we're all feeling so deeply, and yet, you know, it's really important. As Terry, it was her brother, is that right? Who
Yeah.
felt unheard? Yeah, who felt unheard. You know, maybe there's, I don't know where that happens, but I like the idea of collecting people's stories so that they do feel heard. I actually have a piece that I thought I would read today from Glad to Be Human.
Mhm.
I didn't know what to expect. None of us did. But I have an essay in here called Broken Just So. So I will show you here what I am talking about. And then I can actually show you this is the thing in question. Broken Just So. Sad events have happened recently, not so much to me directly, but in the lives of people close to me. Business disappointments, unexpected hospitalizations, and the untimely passing of a young mother here in our community darkened many hearts. What do we make of such pains, such losses? A treasured vase came to mind. It belonged to my mother and is an object whose graceful fanning fluted form I have ever loved. Earlier this year, it broke. It did not shatter, but it will never hold water and a live bouquet again. Yet I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. I kept it in my studio with the broken places turned from view. This morning, I was inspired to take a little action and refrain from cursing the darkness, so to speak. Because it had broken just so, I could thread a small bulb on a simple fixture precisely through the break. Had the break not been just so, this lovely glowing lamp would not exist. But neither would it exist had the break never happened. Let us hope that in those times life breaks our hearts. They break just so, to let our light shine forth. And I actually have the vase here. I had hoped to be able to show you how the lamp part works, but this is how it broke. And, you know, it's a little thing. You can pop it right in. Oh, actually, this is and then I thought, oh, can I turn off all the lights and you can see how it glows? But there's so much light pouring into this room that I can't give you darkness enough.
That's incredible.
That's where my heart is today.
Irene, are you aware of kintsugi pottery in Japan?
Oh, I love kintsugi. It's one of my favorite things. I have kintsugi'd. I have a fedora that I have gold over the cracks in the crown of the hat.
Well, I'm no poet, but I'm inspired by the pottery that is broken. Do you know what it is, Andy or David or Megan? I don't want to.
Well, I do. I get the idea.
So no, this is particular.
It's
so
even more.
After it's broken, the pieces are reassembled with veins of gold where the cracks are.
Wow.
Almost like a light, as Irene was referring to in her poem.
Yeah.
And it's a high art form because it's a brokenness and togetherness that's kind of an apt metaphor for this whole conversation this afternoon in post-election America, right? We're a kintsugi bowl in this country at the moment. And at the moment, the gold hasn't been laid into pieces. And we are hopeful that eventually it will be. But I'm reminded of that by your poem. So I thought I wrote it up.
Thank you, David. Yes, one of my favorite images. I have a nephew who's a potter, a remarkable potter who digs the clay and chops down the juniper for the fire and micaceous clay, which is a wonderful gold clay in itself. And I commissioned him to do a teapot for me, and it arrived with the handle broken, which of course just he was just, he was crushed because he had packed it very carefully. And I said, well, can you do this? Have you ever heard of kintsugi? He'd never heard of it. So I asked him to do that. And I happened to, I'm a calligrapher, among other things. And in my early days as a calligrapher, I learned how to apply gold. So I have a really special spot in my heart, David, for gold. And I happen to have some gold leaf left. And I sent it to him. And so he was able to kintsugi the handle of the teapot. And it's now usable, but it has even more feeling because I know how hard he worked on that. And he was thinking it would have to be disposed of. So
I'm a potter as well. And by the way, Megan, good environmental story. The solvent that carries the gold when you fire that stuff, super toxic environment. Open all the windows and put a mask on.
Boy, trade-offs galore, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I love that. I love that metaphor. I mean, I think that's super important, right? That we not only, see the cracks, try to mend them, but that we don't erase them, right? They have meaning in these divisions between us, and that meaning is important because it's important to the people. It doesn't mean that it's, an unfixable project, however.
And not papering it over, not sort of thinking you can erase history. This has come up, of course, in this. The other tumultuous aspect of this year has been race and this country grappling with its history. That was, again, one of the magical aspects of Monday's conversation, where we had a white and black members of a family tracing the lineage back to a slaveholder who raped, one of his slaves, his enslaved people. And Reggie Harris and Wallace Raymer spent years finding a way to bridge that familial gap down here at this end. And it's not a question of saying, oh, it's all better now.
That's right.
It's complicated.
Well, it's not, as I said, this space is never going to hold flowers again. It will never hold water. It will never do the thing that we thought it was supposed to do. We have to rethink what it can be. So now it can hold light, but whatever it is, the way that we break and the way that we heal we're not going to ever look the way we thought we looked for a long time. That's done. That's broken. So, but now what is it? How do we use it?
Right. And here we are. I haven't checked Twitter to see what the latest is. The projections were looking again like a sort of still a deeply divided country, but with high prospect of Biden coming through with the presidency. So we'll see how that plays out. As they say in CNN, you have to. This is going to take time. It's going to take time. Getting to the media, the way we cover these things. I credit the John King and everybody, not just at CNN. I was watching some of the Fox coverage too, and other than the commentators, they're pretty solid at tracking what's going on. But there's always this sense of drama and playing up those moments, and not being designed essentially to keep the eyeballs focused on that screen and not going somewhere else. And I do wonder how much of what we're doing as the media can evolve beyond that and still have a sustainable enterprise. I think it comes. The only model I can foresee working is a model where people pay for the privilege of not being hijacked and distracted. Where you're going because something's actually interesting and not saying tune in now or pay attention or activating you. David and Megan, maybe you can both offer some reflection on that too. It's a weird system.
So I'm trying at the moment to start a new newspaper in Concord, Massachusetts. Hyper local, community of 17,000 people, 7,000 households. Served terribly by a Gannett paper where there's one editor for 3 communities, not really even getting a chance to report, and everybody knows it's trash. The business model, Andy, is what you just said. which is that if a quarter of the community pays $100 a year for the online newspaper that I'm creating, as opposed to the one that's trash now, it will be self-sustaining. But it will be free to everybody, and we're going to ask for the contributions. So it's a test of what I have always believed as a journalist is there, which is people want to know what's going on in their lives. And people don't want just the alarm and just the drama and just the narrative, especially at the local level. They want the schools and the births and the deaths and the interesting police blotter and the business news and the environmental and all of that. But the model of journalism has been, it's delivered to you free. And the Googles are free, and the Facebooks are free, and the Twitters are free, and all the social media. I'm sorry we lost David. You know, we lament these social media. Oh my God, they're terrible and they should be reined in. And then I ask, yeah, but do you have a Gmail account? Everybody goes, yeah. And I said, yeah, and how much do you pay for that? And how much do you pay for this and that and the other thing? So to get back to the point, I've talked too much here, is I do believe people have a desire to be informed about what's going on in their community, for which they'll pay. And the model of journalism going forward has a fair claim to that marketplace. There's a downside. Not everybody can afford to pay.
Yeah.
That's why our state's free, and a quarter of the subscribers support everybody getting it.
We have a model like that. That's
wonderful. Wonderful newspaper.
Highlands
Yeah.
Current.
Yeah.
And it has, I'll just talk very briefly about the genesis of this. Gordon Stewart, who had been a speechwriter for Carter, Jimmy Carter, had retired to our community. And Roger Ailes also retired to our community. He bought a big house on literally the mansion on the hill. And Ailes bought the local paper, and he influenced many institutions in town. And in buying the local paper, he prompted Gordon Stewart one day to say, let's create a local paper from the ground up. And it started out as just a website. And then it became the Highlands Current. And I'm on the advisory board, so I'm not a neutral observer, but it's kind of trying to fulfill what David has described. And it's expanded to Beacon, which is a city just north of us that's much more mixed community with poverty and racial issues that are not in our little village of Cold Spring and Phillipstown, Nelsonville. But it shows that this is possible. As you were saying, it's a partial paid, partial free model that you can choose to be a donor / supporter, or you can just get it. It's pretty cool. So
How big's the staff? How big is the paid staff?
Oh, I think it's 5 or 6 now.
Okay.
Yeah. It may be more. I'd have to look at the.
There are dozens of these around the country as I've been putting together my plan. I've done a lot of research, and it's encouraging. Some of them are topic specific. There's some environmental ones. There are a lot of political ones. There's one on the Mississippi State House. There's a whole newspaper that just covers the Mississippi State House. So where there's a demand for knowledge and information, I'm encouraged by things like that. So I'll have to learn more about your model too, Andy.
I'm glad David, when was the last time we were in touch? It was at least 3 years ago. So here we are. I'm happy to kind of, bridge those gaps and get people in touch. And actually, now I see Scott Knowles has come on from Drexel University, who's a historian of disaster. And he's been running a daily. You think I ended up doing this thing 4 times a week, and it feels like it's completely overwhelmed everything else I'm trying to do. But Scott Knowles, hello, Scott.
Hi, Andy.
Has a daily COVID calls that started out in the early days of this pandemic, and he's had on every possible kind of expert and chronicler of what's going on around us. And it's good to have you here. I'm going to be on your show in a couple hours, 5 o'clock.
That's right. Good to see you twice today. It's excellent.
So Scott, how are you doing? First of all, do you live in Pennsylvania or across the river, or where are you situated?
I did live in Pennsylvania for years, but live in New Jersey now and live in Princeton. So not a exciting electoral state in that sense. There may have been a House seat that was flipped, one more Republican House seat that was flipped Democrat here. But, Drexel, where I teach, is in Pennsylvania. So obviously Philadelphia politics and Pennsylvania politics are always close
Right.
on my mind.
So I'm just looking. I kind of want to not dwell on the news, but Biden wins Wisconsin has popped up on the CNN website. What have we been missing? While we've been talking, what have we missed?
Kind of the same. I think, watching the 24-hour news cycle, I don't usually engage in it much anymore, like hour by hour, but you do have to admire how much they do with so little information sometimes. So I know, particularly trying to keep viewers. I know, but the smallest thing will break in. But this Wisconsin thing seems pretty clear, and
yeah.
Watching what's happening in Georgia, where they say they will have the count in by the end of the day, is interesting too. There do seem to be enough votes out there in Georgia for Biden to come over the top, but he would have to kind of run the table for every vote that's still out there.
And don't forget the Senate. I've been checking the news as well. Susan Collins, quite unexpectedly, has been reelected in Maine. So if there's a Biden presidency and a Democratic House, there will still be an obstructionist Mitch McConnell-led Senate.
Oh, I thought I saw a headline 2 hours ago saying it had gone the other way, but boy, that says a lot.
Right.
No,
so that's another thing to keep our eye on as to where America goes. I mean, if it all lines up Democratic, climate change stuff happens, all kinds of things happen. But the Senate is equally as important to watch for the progress on all these policy questions.
I think that's a really interesting point because particularly Collins will be an interesting one in terms of, will she remain obstructionist in a less Republican-friendly Washington? Will she remain obstructionist on climate policy? And Tom Tillis, it looks like he's kept his seat unexpectedly in North Carolina. I think polls last week had him down by like 14 points. North Carolina should be the point of the spear for state-level climate change work. And, it should be a state where they're leading, given how frequently their coastline is bashed and sea level rise there. He's just nowhere on that. So, that gives me a lot of concern.
So, Scott, I mean, you've used conversation all through this year to drive understanding around disasters. And I think you said we missed the idea that in cases like this, we're living in a state of disaster. It's a dynamic, it's like disastering. Disaster is a verb. It's not an event. And I didn't know if there's some aspect of that translates to how we think about where we are politically right now.
We've been talking about COVID-19. Everybody's been talking about it so long now that I think it's become the sort of background, the precondition for all other discussions. I mean, it's been on my mind so much in the last, few hours in the last day too, because I was wondering if we would be able to say, or how we will be able to talk about the causality of the pandemic in terms of affecting the election outcome. And I just don't think it's going to be, I think if we're looking for unicausal explanations, we're not going to see it, because the pandemic is the context within which part of the Black Lives Matter movement manifests itself this year. It's the context within which the economic recession is happening. So it's very hard to parse it out. And I think it's, to your point, disastering is right. I mean, we're living in disaster. Maybe we're more aware now than we were before February that there's a large percentage of Americans who live in disaster all the time. Right. Because of insecurities of any number of different types and violence that they face. But as a much larger group of us now who confront it on a daily basis, whether or not that had the potential to form a grounds for politics was something I was very interested in and remain interested in. I can't say anything definitive, but I can't see that it hurt Trump with his base, and it may have helped him.
Let me interject, Scott. We discussed this at the beginning of the show. Pardon me, Andy, for going back over earlier material. I stumbled this morning on a piece of data from Reuters that compared how Trump did in 139 counties across the country where people are dying left and right, very high mortality COVID death rates. He did better in those counties. So to me, I interpret that as the loyalty to the tribe trumped fear of the disease. The fear of being rejected by your tribe, which we need for our own safety, trumped the fear of the disease. What threatens us the most wins usually. And in this case, it was loyalty to our tribe still being in power.
That
So
relates,
you know what?
by the way, sorry, just one other lens on this. And actually I see Dale Willman in the let me bring in Dale Willman, my colleague here now, who's up in the in Saratoga
David,
Springs.
good to see you.
Another early Society of Environmental Journalists figure, and now at Columbia building our resilience journalism project. So, boy, the one thing I wanted to add to what Scott was just saying is that in the politicization of street violence, the Omar Wasow at Princeton had done this big study showing that when violent demonstration tended to kick back and result in, deflection or be exploited by law and order candidates, through history. It feels pretty straightforward to a lot of us, but it was actually in the data. And that just feels like that was another layer that was here. So you had the COVID-19, you had this effort to sort of politicize racial justice actions, which had these nodes of violence around them. And as actually, he just had to cut out, I think his computer froze. David Ropeek was saying, in many instances, that looked to empower Trump's base, Trump's relationship with his base. So, Scott, that was a long-winded interruption between David and you. But what do you think about all that?
No, I think that's a useful. I think it's a useful additional thing to think with. I guess the thing that's nagging me, or that I hope we're all considering right now, is that if it's that there's a percentage of voters that we're going to give Trump a pass, or maybe even reward him, because managing any kind of disaster, but particularly a pandemic, is just hard to do. And maybe you would just say, this is challenging, and there's a lot of numbers going around, and Trump was telling people over the last month that 2 million people could have died, and if 10% of that died, then shouldn't he get some credit for good management? I would take issue with that, but I'm not the person he's speaking to. I think that goes into sort of one category. There's another category, though, which he has also just sought to discredit and muddy the science itself, and to actually deny the seriousness of the virus. And he's done that in 100 different ways. Sometimes on the same day, sometimes in the same speech, to literally just confuse it to the point at which you could, and polls in the last month have shown an uptick in people who've just said, I just don't understand it, or it's not as bad as I'm being told, or which I'm coming to call some sort of version of kind of a Sandy Hook style COVID trutherism, which is no longer fringy. And if that's what he tapped into, that's really distressing, I think. And that, of course, connects with climate denial and many other kinds of science denial, which will bleed out into the science space, which makes it just very hard to do policy.
Well, and also to be a journalist covering this, and going back to what we were talking about when David brought up the debate about journalism versus environmental activism. When somebody is moving the needle on you for partisan ends, right? How can journalism and the media recalibrate in a way that doesn't that still maintains the importance of credibility, which has long been maintained by objectivity and an appeal to neutrality among issues that are in debate, But when somebody is making an issue that shouldn't be in debate for political ends, what happens then? And I think that is going to be, of all of the things that come out of this particular election in time for environmental journalists, going to be one of the biggest things to really figure out.
But doesn't that come down some to the way that journalists allow themselves to be manipulated with the framing of a story? Something that fascinated me the other day was hearing someone talking about this Biden the socialist, and how that needs to always be responded to, but no one says Trump the fascist, and they need to respond to that. So just by that framing, the vision is shifted drastically to how one candidate is viewed from another candidate just by the use of that language. And this is also something, Megan, I think that environmental journalists face so often, is the framing that goes even back to the very heart of what an environmental journalist is. And SCJ, I'm a proud member, has always had this fight: is, are we environmentalists or are we journalists? And why are those incompatible, and why is that a question that's even out there? So the way these things are framed, and I think, Scott, that's what you're talking about too, is the idea of how these things are framed, and how do journalists begin to see that more clearly and take back the control of that, not allow the other players to control the playing field. I remember hearing once that attorneys, they don't, it's not about winning, it's about setting the playing field. So if they get their playing field, they win, and that's to me, that's the framing issue in a nutshell. And so the battle now is over framing more than anything else.
Well, I think that a journalist should be in charge of how they frame their their editors, maybe. Let's be real, in charge of how the story is framed, and not let others frame it for them. I think ultimately, whether that addresses all of the debates is debatable.
But it is interesting, because if a journalist frames, one of Trump's closing bits of his stump speech over the last 2 weeks has been that COVID-19 death numbers have been inflated because hospitals and doctors can make more money that way. So that's a conspiracy theory.
Oh, yeah.
There's no evidence for that whatsoever. And of course, the absence of evidence is the proof of conspiracy. It's anti-science. I didn't see it framed in the same kind of way that you'd see QAnon framed, but it's right next door.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's really, and I don't know, from the journalist's perspective, at what point you have the freedom or the responsibility to frame it that way, rather than just saying that's just Trump being Trump, or that's just Trump bashing healthcare. But this is my deep concern, that if we're going to make any progress on COVID or on anything with science in the United States, we're going to have to just be very attentive to the fact that disinformation is not an epiphenomenon anymore. Disinformation is in the ecosystem, and it's a lively player 24/7 now. Yeah,
Jay Rosen from NYU, longtime constructive critic of media practices, he said on the show back in March that the media needs to have a different mode when there's what he calls a civic emergency, meaning when the state of play around facts is being so co-opted, when propaganda is essentially a constant stream of lie. It's the Gish Gallop on steroids. And he has a very articulate way of describing solutions, including a truth sandwich. You don't repeat the lie at the top of your news item. You sandwich it with the reality. And so there are things to do. I want to just quickly show someone on Twitter led me to this New Zealand interview that's worth, if you don't mind, it's worth seeing here. Here we go. Where essentially she takes on a politician who had been somewhat Trumpian.
After a decade in politics, former national MP.
First of all, can you hear her okay? I have to make sure the volume.
Yes.
Is out of Parliament. The Advance NZ co-leader joins me now. Jamie Lee, you just described yourself as a loser. You are out of national, out of parliament, out of botany. Your political career is in tatters. Do you have any regrets?
Look, we gave it a good go this time round. We put together a new party. In just a few months' time, we only gathered 1% of the vote. It clearly wasn't enough, but I've enjoyed the opportunity to work with all the people that I have with Advance New Zealand.
Do you want to have another crack at answering that? Because I just asked you if you have any regrets. You've just been part of a political movement which has been peddling misinformation during the election campaign. Do you have any regrets?
No, I think we were asking some hard questions about the direction of COVID-19. If you're asking about regrets throughout the whole 3-year term, of course, we could have all done things a lot differently and a lot better back in 2018, but we're here now. We made our bed and we just moved forward.
I want to focus on the strategy. Look, why on earth did you get into bed with Billy Te Kahika?
I could see that there was a lot of growth on social media. There was a lot of growth in the number of people coming along and looking at it.
Purely political ambition.
No,
you sold your soul for political ambition.
I could see that there was people out there who were asking questions around things that I believe in too, around freedom and sovereignty for New Zealand.
And a pandemic.
No, that is nothing. I've never said that, Tova.
You haven't, but he has.
I've never said that. COVID-19 is a real virus, and we were asking questions about whether the country was going in the right direction.
You know exactly what you were doing. You were whipping up fear and hysteria among vulnerable communities.
Not at all. If you go and look at the mortality rate of COVID-19 compared to other flu epidemics,
I'm going to stop. No, I'm not. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear any of. I don't want to hear any of that rubbish.
What do you? What do you? That and not allow me to answer.
Well, if you're going to come on, the show and say things which are just factually incorrect, I can do that. Actually, politics is all you've known. What are you going to do? What are you going to do after this?
I think it's time for a rest. But look, I've enjoyed the decade that I've been in Parliament. I think it's been one where I've been able to serve my community of botany, and I've done that diligently. And the last 2 years wasn't what I expected when we had election 2017. But there's a whole lot of characters in the National Party too that I think will be looking back at this term and thinking they could have and should have done things a lot differently.
You said you do have some regrets from the 3-year parliamentary term, or perhaps more broadly in your political career. This might be the last time that you're on air, probably the last time that we'll invite you on. Are there any apologies that you want to issue to anyone?
I think we all in the National Party back in 2018 could have done things differently, and we should have. And that was probably the start of the decline for the National Party. Had we all done things differently, we'd all be in a different position. But it happened, we move forward, and we focus on the future. That's what I'm doing now.
Do you take some responsibility for the drubbing that was served to the National Party last night?
Internally, back in early 2018, I was asking questions about whether the party was too negative, whether we should have been more aspirational, whether Simon Bridges was connecting with New Zealanders. I wasn't listened to internally. That was the falling out I had with Simon Bridges. Over time, it got worse and it blew out publicly. I was saying back then, though, the National Party wasn't connecting. Tonight, or last night, their 27% was because they weren't offering a vision. They weren't offering hope to New Zealanders, and Jacinda Ardern did.
Why did you stand down in botany? Because all of the conversations that we had, you stand down.
I wanted that Labour would have won the seat. So I guess my final gift to the National Party was given to Christopher Luxon.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Former National MP Jamie Lee Ross.
Wow. If only she should come be hired up here, immediately. Was that fascinating or not? Let's hear a round of what we thought about that. Maybe Megan?
I think you're starting to see people take this approach in the U.S. now, slowly, one at a time. You've seen people press on questions to the extent that they're able, right? And it's not always, don't always have that opportunity in the Rose Garden or elsewhere to really do, what she did. But it also opens you as a reporter up to to a lot of flack for not letting somebody speak, about something, which in our political system is held very to be very to be a principle. Let somebody speak. So I think it is going to be, we're going to see some evolution, but it's not going to be, from there to there overnight.
It's, and just thinking about the CDC and folks like Fauci and others who were so hamstrung, have been, and how they've been able to connect with the media or not, even whether he wins or not, or he doesn't, Trump can fire him tomorrow. And that line between the politics of the risk and the data of the risk is something that's just profoundly still unclear. David Ropik, I think way back on .earth, one of the pieces I wrote that had the headline, "Are we stuck with blah, 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 bang?" that you were, I think you had contributed to, gets at this issue that I've come upon as a reporter so much. And it's not just context like right now, like after 9/11, writing about the dust down in lower Manhattan, politicians were completely in like protecting their interests mode more than saying we don't really know what's in the dust. Like, not dealing with uncertainty feels like one of the big challenges here too. Of course, Scott knows this well too, and Dale, who's training journalists how to cover resilience. So is that part of the landscape here too? Do these issues come at us most when there's complexity and uncertainty as opposed to?
So uncertainty in the risk. First of all, hi, Dale, old friend, David Ropik. Hi.
Nice to see you, David.
I lost my signal when you were being introduced. I said hi before. In the psychology of risk perception, uncertainty means you don't know what you need to know to control your risk, your safety, right? So when a new risk comes along, it's scary because it's new, because new means we don't understand it fully. So what do we do to try and get control? We buy guns, we buy toilet paper, we buy gas masks after the anthrax letters following 9/11. We know they won't actually help, but they do give us a sense of control. Now, to get back to your politicians, everybody, well, let's just talk about them. They don't like the sense that they will be seen as not in control, right? We look to them, especially in times of crisis, as you deal with, Scott, apparently with disasters and so forth. We, in fact, in the first day or two, will trust whoever's in charge. We were ready to trust this White House, in fact. When COVID first hit, it wasn't until it started to get politicized, masks, it's not a big deal, it's a hoax, all the bullshit, that we lost that. Politicians hate not sounding like they're in control because uncertainty makes it sound like they don't have the power that we're counting on them to have. And so they make shit up. I made a living for 15 years as a consultant to governments and corporations that wanted to manifest that they had more control over a risk situation that they did, and screwed up the public's trust. The way to win that trust is to say, we don't know everything yet. And all the examples of good risk communication, I hope you've talked about that in your COVID show, Scott, because risk communication's so much of how people behave. All the good examples of risk communication is, I'm on your side, but we don't know stuff, is a fine answer to give. Politicians are too chicken shit to use it.
Well, I would say it's even more basic than that, though. I mean, what we've seen over the last 10 years, whatever, is that more and more, and this feeds into the tribal thing too, that politicians can say whatever they want, and they know that their tribe's going to go along with them regardless of what it is. We've heard so much batshit crazy stuff over the last 4 years from a lot of mouths, and people are just taking it in. So crisis, I think, makes the situation more fluid and more uncertain, so that people are even more willing to hear that stuff and to accept it. But I think that's only accentuated. It hasn't created the problem. I mean, I left Washington. I've been up in the North Country for 20 years now, and before then I worked 15 years for networks in DC. And I left in part because I was so frustrated with having to play that game of talking to people when you know they're lying and wanting to say what the woman from New Zealand did, but you weren't allowed to do that. And I look back and think, wow, how naive was that? Because that was the golden years compared to what we have now, the golden years of truth. It's this inability to accept reality that is fed by this whole tribal thing that is fascinating to me and frustrating and to everybody, and puzzling to journalists, and how we get past that, I think, is a real huge question.
But I would add one thing, Dale. In the first moments of a crisis or disaster, it hasn't been polarized and tribalized yet. It hasn't been identified what I'm supposed to think. The thought leaders, the commentariat, the politicians themselves, in the very first few hours, literally, or days of a new thing, a crisis thing, we're more afraid for our ass than our tribe, because it hasn't been tribalized. There's a huge opportunity there Dan Kahane at Yale talks about this with cultural cognition, right? Try to detribalize the situation when you talk post-tribalization, but try to avoid talking about it in those terms at all, especially at the beginning. So
I'm glad you brought Kahan up, because he, in the groups these identified, he found one that I'm fascinated with, and they called them the scientifically curious. So Kahan did a lot of the work about the tribalism, and he defined several of the tribes that people were fitting themselves into. But he found one called scientifically curious, I think is the way he characterized them. And those were the people who, when I was started in journalism 40 some years ago, the belief was that you put out important information, people would take it in, they would respond accordingly with that new information. And now all the research that Kahan and these other people are doing, we know is bullshit. So is this group of people, the scientifically curious, who are able to change their views, their positions, their belief systems, whatever it might be, based on fact, are they influencers that journalists can try to reach out to as a way to change perceptions towards scientific reality within those tribes? Because the hardest thing for journalists is, if the old model of we put information out, people take it in, doesn't work anymore, how do we begin to define our stories? The framing I mentioned earlier, how do we frame them in a way that gets people who wouldn't listen to us or pay attention to us to do so and actually change their views based on that new information?
And one of the examples there, if I can continue to talk, forgive me, is Ed Maybach's work with TV meteorologists.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So there, it's not so much that you're appealing to the scientifically curious, but you're using a trusted voice. It's like getting pediatricians to talk about get vaccines for your kids. So you can get past the tribalism if you can find a universally trusted voice. This is another risk communication 101 sort of thing to do. But I want to add about the scientifically curious, because I worked with Dan at the very beginning with PBS and a bunch of projects on exactly this. And he acknowledges that that's a real tiny slice of people, because most of the people who pass what's called the cognitive reflection test, which is a measure of how carefully you want to think about things, and who have postgraduate educations, are better at twisting the facts into how they want to see them.
Yeah.
And do that even worse is the work of Ellen Peters and other people, right? All it means is that their brain is better at the motivated reasoning that's really going on, right? So detribalizing it, fine. The scientifically curious that are truly open-minded are, as Dan will concede, this small. Right. You can widen it if you take out the tribal identities, like he's done with climate change in South Florida, which is hugely successful.
So we are at the end of our stretch. I could keep this running for right through till Scott Knowles has his COVID show at 5. But
let's just go till they call the presidency.
We're going to be doing more on that.
Oh shit! No, I got to go to the bathroom before that for sure.
Although I'll tell you, there's some interesting things going on. Fox News earlier on its website had this probability dial, like their version of the New York Times
needle.
And I had tweeted, I noticed that they were from Michigan and Nevada and Wisconsin. They were way over into the blue. And I'm looking now, and their website, it looks like it's a dead link. I think they took down their probability dials. Now, if that isn't a foretelling of something, I don't know what it is.
You shouldn't have tweeted that, Andy.
I don't know. We'll find out. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here. And to those who were here earlier, man, the discussion with Terry Tempest Williams, the poetry of Andre Codrescu and Irene O'Garden, had a little music too. Maybe I'll end with the music. This has been a very productive way to kind of deal with the insanity of the moment. Scott Knowles, thanks for being on from Drexel and your daily COVID calls at 5 p.m. Megan Parker from Society of Environmental Journalists, great to have you here. And we should have you back. We can talk more, dig in more on the issues of new ways to cover these phenomena around us that seem to be a really bad fit for conventional journalism. David Ropeek, How Risky Is It Really? Still, great book, great mind when it comes to digging into the behavioral norms that make us potentially not very well suited to the tasks that face humanity right now, and us as individuals as well. but at least awareness of the limitations of our biology and our the way our communities function is an important step forward. And my friend and colleague Dale Willman, who runs the Resilience Media Project here at the Earth Institute Initiative for Communication and Sustainability. Thanks all for being here today. And
thanks for having us.
I think we'll do more on this. I'd like to think we're done with some of these issues, but we are not done with these issues.
But for now, we're leaving meeting. The phrase is leaving meeting now, right?
Leaving, yeah. Although in StreamYard they don't have leaving meeting.
Oh,
I like StreamYard. So here's a general look at what we do. Forget about it. I'm toiling here too much. Thanks, guys. Thanks. Megan.
See you later.
Thank you all.
Chat with
Let's keep at it.
Good to see everybody.
Okay.
Take
Good
care.
luck, everybody.
Bye. And for those who are still there, I'm going to thank you very much. And Dale, take care.